That buttery croissant in your hand, and that dark, steaming coffee on your desk? To you, it's just a peaceful morning routine. But 340 years ago, this was the bloody trophy of a fallen empire. September 12th, 1683. 4 a.m. The city of Vienna is seconds away from being erased from the map. 300,000 Ottoman soldiers are deep beneath the city walls, ready to ignite the fuse that would turn Europe into a graveyard. But the course of human history didn't change because of a king or a general. It changed because of a baker who couldn't sleep. If Peter Bender hadn't heard that faint scratch against the stone in his cellar, this video wouldn't be in English. And you wouldn't be drinking coffee. From the discarded trash of a retreating army to the high-end luxury of Paris, this is the butterfly effect that turned a massacre into a breakfast. Take a bite of history. Let's dive in.
The Shadow of the Crescent.
The history of the world is rarely decided in grand palaces. More often, it is forged in the sweat of a basement by a man who was just trying to bake bread. Morning, croissant, espresso, quietude. But did you know that every bite you take is actually a 300-year-old insult? Croissant, empire's fall. Coffee, battlefield's waste. Vibrating bowl saved us all, or world's end. Vienna's siege. West nearly gone. Ottoman death tunnels, cavalry charge, a bloody history. And how a literal pile of trash became a multi-billion-dollar global industry. By the end of this hour, you will never look at your breakfast the same way again. But to understand the victory, we have to understand the terror. In the summer of 1683, Vienna was the golden apple, the last door standing between the Ottoman Empire and the rest of Europe. And the man coming to kick that door down was Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa. Mustafa was a man of shadow and immense pressure. In the Ottoman court, if you failed the Sultan, you weren't fired, you were sent a black silk cord. It was a silent order to strangle yourself. Mustafa wasn't just fighting for land, he was fighting to keep his own head. He arrived with an army of 300,000 souls. Imagine a sea of 25,000 silk tents stretching as far as the eye can see. With campfires so numerous they turned the night into an artificial day. Inside the city, Count Starhemberg had only 15,000 men. The odds were 20-1. Starhemberg was a man of cold, brutal math. He ordered every house outside the city walls to be burned to the ground. Thousands watched their lives turn to ash, just so the cannons could have a clear line of sight. But here's the thing most people miss. The real war wasn't happening on the walls. It was happening beneath the feet of the people. Mustafa's secret weapon wasn't his cannons. It was his sappers, master miners from the Balkans. While the cannons roared to distract the guards, these men were digging death highways toward the city's heart. They were planning to pack the foundations of Vienna with enough gunpowder to lift the entire city into the sky. And here is where the story takes a turn you won't believe. Peter Wendler was a baker. He didn't care about kings or viziers. He cared about dough. On a night when the world was eerily quiet, he was working in his cellar when he noticed something impossible. A bowl of water on his table was shivering. There were no explosions, no horses, just a fine, crystalline vibration. He knelt on the cold stone floor, pressed his ear to the earth, and heard a sound that made his heart stop. The rhythmic scraping of metal against rock, directly beneath his feet. He realized the enemy wasn't at the gates, they were already under his hearth. Wendler bolted for the door, flour-stained and screaming. But even with the alarm raised, the city faced a terrifying question. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? In the next section, we're going into the Underworld war, where men fought with their bare hands in pitch-black tunnels, using a bizarre technology involving dancing peas to find their killers. But first, we have to talk about why the rest of Europe was actually hoping Vienna would fall.
Part 2.
The Underworld War.
As the alarm from the baker's cellar reached the surface, a chilling realization swept through Vienna. The city was rotting from the inside out. But here is the secret that most history books are too afraid to tell you. The most brutal war in human history wasn't happening on the battlefield. It was happening in total darkness, 20 feet beneath the cobblestones. While the soldiers on the walls were dodging cannonballs, the survival of Western civilization was being decided by a bizarre, low-tech piece of secret sonar. To understand this, you have to look at the dancing peas. Imagine you are a Viennese defender. You haven't slept in 3 days. The air is thick with the smell of death and gunpowder. You don't have radar. You don't have sensors. Instead, you place a massive military drum in your basement and scatter dried peas across the drum skin. This was the 17th century's high-stakes game of Marco Polo. If an Ottoman sapper was digging 100 feet away, the vibration would hit the drum and make the peas dance. By watching the pattern of those jumping peas, you could tell exactly where the killer was. It was a terrifying, silent lottery. If the peas stopped dancing, it meant the digging was over and the explosion was coming. But here is where it gets truly disturbing. What if the digging wasn't just to blow up the walls? What if the sound itself was the weapon? Stay with me, because Kara Mustafa, the Ottoman leader, was using a psychological tactic so cruel it's still studied by military psychologists today. He ordered phantom digging, empty tunnels, designed just to keep the citizens awake. Imagine lying in bed with your children, listening to a shovel underneath your floorboards for weeks, never knowing which second would be your last. It was a masterpiece of insomnia-driven terror. Once a real tunnel was found, the counterminers went in. These were men recruited from the deepest coal mines of Europe, and their job was a one-way trip into hell. You're in a tunnel so narrow you can't even turn your shoulders. You're digging with a handpick in absolute silence, listening to the enemy's heartbeat through a thin wall of dirt. When the wall finally broke, it wasn't a sword fight. It was a primal, suffocating brawl in the pitch black. Men used daggers, their bare teeth, and even bags of crushed pepper to blind their killers. It was a war of the moles, where the loser was buried alive in a tomb of mud and shadow. By early September, the dancing peas were jumping faster than ever. The math was simple. Vienna had 24 hours left. The meat was gone. The water was poisoned. Starhemberg sat in his tower, holding his last flare, looking out at a horizon that remained stubbornly dark. If he lit that flare and no one answered, the Janissaries would enter the city and the streets would turn into a river of blood. He struck the match. The blue flame hissed into the sky, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. But then, something impossible happened. A sound began to echo from the mountains. It wasn't the sound of a rescue army. It was a sound so bizarre and terrifying that the Ottoman soldiers began to drop their weapons in sheer superstitious dread. It sounded like thousands of ghosts screaming from the clouds. Next, we are going to meet the winged devils and the king who spent a fortune just to make his soldiers sound like demons. You've seen them in movies, but the reality of the winged hussars is much more terrifying than any CGI. Why did they wear feathers? And why was their 20-foot lance the most expensive missile of the 17th century? We are about to witness the largest cavalry charge in human history.
Part 3. The Wings of Terror.
As the blue flare died out over the ridge, the 300,000 soldiers of the Ottoman Empire looked up and saw something that shouldn't exist. Standing on the peaks of the Kahlenberg was a vision from a fever dream. 18,000 horsemen, their armor shimmering in the moonlight, with giant, feathered wings arching over their heads like the wings of predatory birds. They didn't look like an army. They looked like an apocalypse. But here's where we need to stop and look at the micro-history. You've seen the Hollywood version, but the reality is much more terrifying. Let's address the question everyone asks. Why would the most elite cavalry on Earth wear giant wooden frames covered in eagle feathers? Most people think it was just style or for parades. That is a dangerous mistake. These wings were a piece of acoustic psychological warfare. Imagine the physics of fear. When 18,000 horses are thundering at a full gallop, the wind rushes through those thousands of feathers at a specific frequency. The result? A high-pitched, vibrating whistle that sounds like a legion of ghosts screaming from the sky. To an Ottoman soldier who had spent months in a dark, silent tunnel, this sound was a physical assault on the brain. It was designed to panic the horses and shatter the nerves of the men before a single sword was even drawn. But even the ghost whistle was nothing compared to the secret hidden in their hands. Most cavalry of the 17th century used 10-foot spears. The Ottomans had elite pikemen with 15-foot pikes specifically designed to stop horses. This should have been a suicide mission for the Polish. But the Hussars had a micro-tech secret, the copia. It was a 20-foot lance, light as a feather because it was hollowed out like a modern aircraft wing and held together by specialized glue. This meant a hussar could impale an Ottoman soldier before the soldier's own weapon could even touch the horse. It was a one-use, high-precision missile made of wood and silk. Now, ask yourself, why didn't everyone just build these? Because a single winged hussar was the 1% of the 1%. To equip one man his custom-bred horses, his silver-gilded armor, and his hollowed-out lances cost more than the yearly taxes of an entire village. If you lost one hussar, you weren't just losing a soldier. You were losing the equivalent of a modern M1 Abrams tank. This was a high-stakes gamble with the entire wealth of the Polish nobility. But even with this gear, they faced a geographical nightmare. Sobieski was at the top of a steep, wooded mountain. Military logic of the time said you cannot charge heavy cavalry through a forest and down a 45-degree slope. It was madness. Kara Mustafa, the Ottoman leader, was so confident in this terrain that he didn't even point his cannons toward the hills. He assumed the trees and the rocks would do the killing for him. He was dead wrong. Sobieski didn't just see a forest, he saw a ramp. He spent the entire morning of September 12th personally scouting the paths, ordering his men to clear narrow fire lanes through the trees. He wasn't just preparing a charge, he was preparing a tsunami of steel. As the sun began to dip, the king turned to his son. He didn't give a speech about glory or gold. He pointed to the smoking ruins of Vienna and whispered, "We are not here to win a battle. We are here to decide the next 500 years." Then, he lowered his visor. In the next section, we are going into the heart of the largest cavalry charge in human history. We will break down, second by second, how 18,000 horses created a kinetic impact so powerful, it literally shook the foundations of the city. We're moving from the engineering of fear to the reality of the massacre.
Part 4, The Tsunami of Steel.
It was 6 p.m. on the 12th of September 1683. The sun was dipping low, painting the valley of Vienna in a bruised purple and gold. For 12 brutal hours, the infantry had been grinding through the mud, and the city was seconds away from a total massacre. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa was so certain of his victory that he was reportedly already picking out which rooms in the Habsburg palace he would claim for himself. But then, King John Sobieski reached the crest of the hill and raised his sword. This was the moment of the kinetic breaking point, a second in history that would change the trajectory of the next 5 centuries. 18,000 horses didn't just move, they surged. But here's something the movies never tell you about a cavalry charge. It doesn't start with a scream. It starts with a vibration so deep you feel it in your teeth before you hear it in your ears. 72,000 hooves hitting the earth in unison created a seismic event. Inside the city of Vienna, miles away, the starving citizens reported that dust began to fall from the ceilings of the cathedrals and water in their cups began to ripple, just like the baker's bowl we talked about in part 1. It was as if the earth itself was trying to shake the Ottoman army off its back. But wait, how did they not just crash into each other? This is where the Polish military genius shines. The Hussars started in a loose, spaced out formation to make them a difficult target for Ottoman cannons. But as they hit the 100-yard mark, they did something that seems physically impossible. They tightened the gap until their knee guards were literally locked together. They transformed from 18,000 individuals into a single, solid wall of 3 million pounds of muscle and iron. When that wall hit the Ottoman camp, the kinetic energy was equivalent to a modern freight train hitting a brick wall at full speed. Those 20-foot hollowed lances, they didn't just poke the enemy. They acted like high-pressure pistons, sometimes impaling 3 or 4 men in a single thrust before the wood finally shattered. Now, imagine you're an Ottoman soldier. You've been told these jowers are weak, but as they charge, the sun is behind them, catching those giant feathered wings. Because of the speed and the dust, it created a strobe light effect. To the Janissaries, it didn't look like men on horses. It looked like a legion of 10-foot tall, shimmering demons, screaming with a high-pitched, ghostly whistle. The psychological collapse was instantaneous. Kara Mustafa, the man who dreamed of being a legend, didn't even have time to pack his golden coffee set. He fled into the night, leaving behind the most expensive military camp in the history of the world. The battle was won, but the mystery of the trash was just beginning. As the Polish and Austrian soldiers began to loot the camp, they found mountains of gold and silk, but they also found something that confused them. Thousands of heavy sacks filled with small, hard, green-black beans. The soldiers, exhausted and angry, looked at these beans and made a massive mistake. They assumed it was camel fodder, or, even worse, dried camel dung meant for fuel. They began to drag the sacks to the fires to burn them. They were literally moments away from destroying what would become the most valuable commodity in the history of Europe. While the generals were busy counting their gold and the kings were writing their victory speeches, one man was watching the soldiers throw those worthless beans into the fire. His name was Jerzy Kulczycki, and he was the only man in the entire army who knew that the black waste in those sacks was actually worth more than its weight in gold. Mini Hook 4, the spy's secret gamble. Next, we're going to see how this one man convinced a city of traumatized survivors to drink the enemy's black soup. We are moving from the blood-soaked fields of Vienna to the birth of the very first cafe, where a spy used a religious insult to invent the croissant. If you think the battle was the most interesting part of this story, wait until you see the marketing genius that turned a war trophy into your morning breakfast.
Part 5. The Spy and the Bitter Bean.
As the smoke cleared from the blood-soaked fields of Vienna, the city didn't wake up to peace. It woke up to a massive, stinking pile of garbage. The Ottoman army had fled so quickly, they left behind a treasure trove that looked like a confused museum. Gold-plated armor, silk rugs, exotic animals, and most importantly, 500 heavy sacks of mysterious green-black beans. While the Austrian soldiers were busy dragging away chests of silver, they looked at these sacks and felt insulted. Is this what they were fighting for? They mocked. Camel fodder? Dried dung? They began to heave the bags into the campfires, the air filling with a strange, charred, nutty scent that no one in Vienna recognized. But standing in the middle of the looting was a man who saw gold where everyone else saw trash. Jerzy Kulczycki was not a soldier. He was a survivor. He was a linguist and a spy who had spent years living in the Ottoman Empire, learning their language and, more importantly, their habits. When he smelled that burning trash, he didn't recoil. He smiled. He approached King Jan Sobieski and asked for a very specific reward for his services as a spy. He didn't want the gold. He didn't want the land. He wanted the 500 sacks of worthless beans. The king, thinking Kulczycki had finally lost his mind after the stress of the siege, laughed and granted the request. But now, Kulczycki faced a problem that was harder than sneaking through enemy lines. How do you convince a traumatized, starving city to drink the black soup of the enemy? You have to understand the devil's advocate perspective of 1683. To the people of Vienna, this dark liquid wasn't just a drink. It was the infidels' wine. It was bitter. It looked like mud. And it was associated with the men who had just spent 2 months trying to blow them up. His first few attempts to sell it were a disaster. People spat it out, calling it charcoal water. Koljicki was sitting on a mountain of inventory that no one wanted. He was a hero on the verge of bankruptcy. This is where Koljicki moved from being a spy to being a marketing genius. He realized that the Viennese palate was different from the Ottoman one. The Ottomans drank their coffee black and strong, a punch to the face. The Viennese loved cream, sugar, and elegance. So, he started experimenting. He took that bitter, dark extract and did the unthinkable. He strained out the grit and added a heavy dose of honey and fresh milk. Suddenly, the black soup transformed. It turned a beautiful, silky brown, the color of a monk's habit. This was the birth of the cappuccino style, but he didn't stop with the recipe. He realized he needed a framework to change the narrative. He opened his cafe, the Blue Bottle, and instead of dressing like a local, he wore his full, elaborate Turkish robes. He played into the exoticism. He made drinking coffee feel like a safe way to conquer the enemy's culture. You weren't just drinking a beverage, you were drinking the spoils of victory. But wait, here is the micro fact that will shock your history buff friends. While Koljicki is the face of every coffee shop in Vienna today, he technically wasn't the first. An Armenian businessman named Iohannis Diodato had actually secured the first official coffee license from the court just a few weeks earlier. But Diodato was a businessman. Koljicki was a storyteller. He understood that people don't buy products, they buy stories. He used his fame as a war hero to make coffee a lifestyle. He turned a battlefield waste into a social necessity. But as the coffee houses began to fill with the elite and the intellectuals of Vienna, Koljicki realized something was missing. A drink this revolutionary needed a companion. It needed something to chew on, something that would make the victory taste even sweeter. Mini Hook 4. The Shape of Revenge. Next, we're going to see how the Chetza bakers we met in part 1 took their revenge. We're moving from the liquid gold to the golden crust. How did a religious symbol of the Ottoman Empire end up being eaten by the millions? And how did a teenage queen from Austria take this bread of spite and turn it into the most famous French pastry in the world? We're entering the final stage of our journey, the birth of the croissant.
Part 6, Eating the Enemy.
As the dust settled and Vienna transformed from a fortress into the world's first coffeehouse capital, something strange began to brew in the minds of the survivors. It wasn't just relief. It was a lingering, acidic spite. The war was officially over, but the trauma of those 2 months in the dark tunnels was still raw. The people of Vienna didn't just want to forget the Ottoman Empire. They wanted to humiliate it. And this is where the city's bakers, the very men who had spent the siege with their ears pressed to the cellar floors, decided to serve up a new kind of justice. They didn't reach for swords. They reached for flour, yeast, and a heavy dose of cold-blooded irony. They decided to create a pastry that would allow every citizen, from the richest count to the poorest beggar, to partake in a daily act of defiance. They took the traditional Austrian bread, the Kipfel, and radically reshaped it. They curved it into a sharp, distinct crescent. Why a crescent? Because the hilal, or the crescent moon, was the sacred symbol of the Ottoman Empire. It was the icon that flew on the banners of the 300,000 soldiers who had come to erase Vienna from the map. The message from the bakers was visceral. They tried to consume us. Now, every morning, we will consume them. Imagine the scene. A Viennese citizen sits in a cafe, takes a sip of dark coffee, and bites the horns off the enemy's symbol. It was a delicious, buttery ritual of revenge. But here is the devil's advocate truth that most people get wrong. Historians found that crescent-shaped breads actually existed centuries before the siege. So why do we tell the 1,683 story? Because in marketing, the legend is more delicious than the truth. This spite marketing turned a simple snack into a national statement of victory. But the Kipfel was a heavy, dense, bread-like roll, nothing like the light, airy masterpiece you know today. To become the global icon known as the croissant, it had to survive a dangerous journey to the most extravagant and most hated palace in the world, Versailles. The bridge between these two worlds was a 14-year-old girl named Marie Antoinette. When she was sent from Austria to marry the future King of France, she was a terrified outsider in a court that spoke a different language and followed alien rules. She was profoundly homesick. In her letters, she begged for the tastes of her childhood, eventually demanding that her personal bakers from Vienna move to Paris to open the Boulangerie Viennoise. However, the French culinary elite were not about to let a simple Austrian bread stay simple. They took the bread of spite and applied the lamination technique, a process that turned baking into a science of layers. Instead of just dough, they folded in massive amounts of cold butter, rolling and folding it dozens of times. The result was a pastry with thousands of microscopic flakes that shattered when you bit into them. They renamed it the croissant, the French word for crescent. It was a marriage of Austrian revenge and French obsession with perfection. But here is the transition you need to hear. By the time Marie Antoinette met her end at the guillotine, her favorite pastry had already conquered the French aristocracy. The golden apple of Vienna had been saved by a baker's ear, but its greatest legacy was now being eaten by the very people who would eventually trigger the French Revolution. Mini Hook 4, the final butterfly effect. Next, we are moving to the finale. We are going to close the loop on how a single morning in 1683 created a multi-billion-dollar breakfast industry. We will look at the modern legacy of the War of the Tunnels and answer the biggest question of all. Is it possible that the culture we love most today, our cafes, our pastries, our morning rituals, is actually a direct product of the most violent hatred of our ancestors? We're going to see how you are still living in the shadow of the 1683 siege every single day.
Part 7. The Queen and the Legacy.
As the heavy blade of the guillotine fell in 1793, it didn't just end the life of Marie Antoinette. It ended an era of absolute monarchy. But while the French revolutionaries were tearing down the statues of kings, they were unknowingly nurturing the greatest legacy the Austrian woman had ever brought to Paris. The queen was gone, but the croissant was doing something no crown could ever achieve. It was attaining global immortality. As the aristocracy fled the terror of the revolution, their personal chefs and bakers scattered across Europe and eventually the Atlantic, taking with them the secret of the lamination and that defiant crescent shape. The bread of spite had escaped the palace, and it was about to conquer the world. But let's look at the micro-history of your own life for a moment. Why should you care about a 350-year-old siege today? Because we are currently living in an economy built by the survivors of 1683. Today, the global coffee and bakery industry is a titan worth over $500 billion. Every single time you walk into a coffee shop, you are stepping into a marketplace that exists only because a baker noticed a vibrating bowl of water, and a spy refused to let enemy waste go to the fire. We aren't just eating food. We are consuming the dividends of a war that saved a continent. If Peter Windler hadn't listened to the Earth, the very concept of a morning cafe wouldn't exist in the West. Here is the deepest devil's advocate insight of our journey. Isn't it strange that the things we find most comforting today, the warmth of a latte, the shatter of a pastry, were born from the most violent hatred of the past? We drink the coffee of the enemy to stay awake and sharp. We eat the symbol of the enemy to celebrate their defeat. This is the paradox of culture. Humans have a miraculous, almost terrifying ability to take the trauma of a 300,000-man siege and turn it into a relaxing morning routine. We've turned a death highway in the tunnels of Vienna into a social highway in our local neighborhoods. Even today, if you walk through the streets of Vienna, you can find the statue of Jerzy Kolczycki, the spy who saved the black beans. He isn't dressed in a military uniform or holding a sword. He is wearing his elaborate Turkish robes and holding a coffee pot. It is a permanent, silent reminder that the greatest way to defeat an enemy isn't to destroy them, it's to absorb them. Vienna didn't just survive the Ottoman Empire, it digested it. It took the enemy's best ideas, mixed them with milk and sugar, and made them its own. The city became more beautiful and more flavorful because of the struggle it endured. We started this journey with a single baker in a dark cellar, listening to the footsteps of the devil. We watched the dancing peas predict an explosion and witnessed 18,000 winged devils descend like a tsunami of steel. Now, as you finish your morning coffee, the circle is complete.
Wrap up.
We asked at the very beginning, why do we eat the enemy's symbol? The answer is that culture is the ultimate survivor. We eat the crescent because we turned our ancestors' fear into our own fuel. But coffee and croissants are just the beginning. Did you know that the spice trade actually launched a secret war that makes the siege of Vienna look like a playground fight? Or that your favorite chocolate bar was once used as literal currency for an empire that sacrificed thousands? If you want to see the micro-history of the foods in your pantry, let me know in the comments below. So, the next time you order a latte and a flaky pastry, remember, you aren't just having breakfast. You are partaking in a 3-century-old ritual of survival, revenge, and the ultimate cultural victory. If this story changed the way you look at your morning routine, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. We have more hidden histories waiting to be uncovered, and you won't want to miss the next one.